Hey everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to chapter 26 of 3 books. Yes, you have joined our epic countdown of the 1,000 most formative books in the world. We are taking 15 years and 333 chapters to pull off this, can we call them incredible? Yeah, incredible feat. We have been everywhere so far, right? We have been all the way down in Key West, Florida for chapter 6 with Judy Blume, where she told us, she confessed to us that she actually stole number 987 on our list, Madeline, by Ludwig Bemelmans from the New Jersey Public Library when she was a kid. For chapter 7, we jumped into the back of Vishwas Agrawal's Uber. For those that don't know, Vish is arguably the world's greatest Uber driver with a 4.99 rating and over 5,000 rides. Stories about Vish have gone viral around the world now. And it all started when I jumped in the back of his Uber, flicked on my recorder, and he started talking to us about books. And he gave us, amongst others, number 983, The Magic of Thinking Big by David J. Schwartz. More recently, we went over to Vancouver, Canada, in British Columbia, where we sat down with the amazing Jessie Finkelstein. She is the co-founder and head honcho of Page 2 Publishing, the most premium self-publishing palace on the planet. I always allow alliteration. And amongst other books, Jessie Finkelstein gave us number 936, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And now today we're back in my hometown of Toronto, Canada, and I was super lucky to squeeze into the packed publicity schedule of the amazing Angie Thomas. And I say squeeze, I mean squeeze. It was a Sunday afternoon. Angie was on the tail end of a 3-week-long 15-city book tour, just kind of a couple cities away from heading home. I'm sure she was spent and burned out and exhausted, but I'm sure also thrilled, because the new book that she was just debuting on the come up debuted at number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. And at the same time that was happening, guess what's number 2? The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. And over the last few weeks, those two books have just been flip-flopping over the number 1 and 2 slot. So it's a Sunday afternoon. I go down to the Royal York Hotel where she's staying, and we're in the hotel lobby. I'm given half an hour. I think I take 32 minutes. Her publicist Maeve was like helping me out. She's like, 10 minutes left, 5 minutes left. You'll even hear her chime in right near the end of the conversation. And so amongst her, bellboys bristling by and people with luggage in their hands and everybody running about in I think the busiest hotel in downtown Toronto, it's got to be one of the busiest, if not the busiest, Angie Thomas opened up for us on her 3 most formative books. And if you don't know Angie Thomas, by the way, you got to, because nobody else right now in the young adult world is putting their finger so clearly on the pulse of the headlines. Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, what's happening with shootings, with violence, with racial tension. There's a lot of bad news in the newspapers every single day. And yet there's also a lot of humanity and a lot of hope and a lot of heart. And Angie Thomas wades into the headlines to give us these incredibly braided stories of resilience and hope and becoming your true self. And that's why in this chapter 26, we discuss themes like, how do you find truth today? How do you find the truth for yourself? When's the right time to introduce social justice issues to young people? I ask her, I'm like, this book's full of swearing. It's full of kind of violence, and so were some of your formative books. So when do we do that for kids and why? And how do we think about it? I asked Angie what the best way to consume the news is. Her answer is super interesting. On her Twitter bio, what did I say there? Twitter bio, she says, I love Jesus, but I cuss. And then Angie reveals to me what she really thinks. When people say they're surprised to find out that she is Christian, there's a ton here. We cover a ton of different themes. As you're listening to this, try to think which 3 quotes, because she is eminently quotable, jump out to you. And at the end of this chapter, I'll share with you which 3 jumped out for me. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the busy hotel lobby of the Royal York Hotel in downtown Toronto, Canada, and sit down with the incredible Angie Thomas, author of The Hate You Give and On the Come Up. Let's go. Okay, we'll just make sure it's working. And hey, Angie.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being on 3 books.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And What a cool atmosphere. So we're sitting in the middle of the Royal York Hotel lobby in downtown Toronto. Around us, for everyone listening can't see, is like people going by with brooms, with suitcases. There's like families that are dressed inappropriately for Toronto, like you, no offense, but it's like it's freezing out and the wind
Oh no, I got a coat.
you got a coat. I'm going to
Yeah.
Edmonton later today, and it's like -20 or something. And I don't travel with jackets
Yeah.
because I always lose them. So I just
Yeah.
have a permanent policy where I don't travel with coats.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you're gonna need one there. We just left there yesterday, Edmonton, and yeah, that was an experience for a Southerner. I'm not used to that much snow.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, speaking of Southerner, I saw you on Twitter the other day said all dressed chips.
Yeah.
We're very similar to like this Louisiana brand of chips or something.
Yeah, Zaps. Zaps has they call them voodoo chips, and like apparently they were made from an accident. Like an employee knocked over a bunch of spices, and before somebody cleaned it up, somebody stuck their finger in, it and they were like, "Oh, this tastes good." They made a chip. I mean, that's such a Southern story.
Oh well, there's a real connection between like Cajun food is short for Acadian, the Canadian Acadians who went down there
Yeah.
from up here, and there's a lot of similarities. So I tried on my way here today, Angie, to get you a bag of Canadian all-dressed chips, and I failed because literally the Shoppers Drug Mart was sold out. So I bought you the next closest Canadian flavor I could find.
Oh gosh,
which is poutine flavored chips.
that's awesome.
Have you ever had a poutine?
I haven't.
So a poutine is French fries covered in cheese curds, covered in
Right.
gravy, but they've taken that
And made a chip.
and turned it into a chip. So
This
crack it
is
open
awesome.
anytime if you get hungry in the middle of this interview.
Okay.
And yeah,
Wow.
we caught you. We're so excited to have you on the show because this show is all about books.
Yeah.
And I know you're a huge reader in addition to such a big author. You're the first author we've ever had on 3 Books, by the way, who has a New York Times #1 and #2 bestseller simultaneously. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And I'm so pumped to get into the books that helped shape who you are.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited.
So I got them all 3 here. Did you want to point to the one you'd like to start with, or do you want me to just pick a random one? And then I'll give the listener like a 30-second overview so they can
yeah.
picture, and I'll ask you to tell us about your relationship.
Let's go with this one.
Okay, great.
Because that's the first one for me.
That's exactly, it's perfect. So the first book that you've selected, your first most formative book, is Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor.
Yes.
Mildred Taylor was born in Jackson, Mississippi, same as you, right?
Yes.
In 1943, not the same as you. This book was published in 1976 by Dial Press, now Penguin Publishing. The cover is a colored pencil drawing of 9-year-old Cassie Logan, young black girl, stamped with the Newbery Medal in 1977 for her distinct contributions to children's literature. By the way, the original cover, I looked it up, was more provocative. It was Cassie holding her 2 little brothers while their farm was burning behind them. So file this Dewey Decimal, folks, and under 813.54 for 20th century fiction. Quick plot, and then I'll ask you over to you. Is it set in Mississippi at the height of the 1930s Depression? Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry is the unforgettable story of one family's struggle to maintain their independence, integrity, and pride in the face of racism and social injustice. This is a story culled from Miss Taylor's own life as an important record of African-American experience from our country's complicated and not so distant past. So Angie, tell us about your relationship with Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor.
I always say this was the first book for me. And no, it wasn't the first book I ever read, but it's the first book that really made an impact on me because it was the first time I saw myself in a book. I remember reading it and I was like, wait, this is about a black girl in Mississippi. Here I am, a black girl in Mississippi. And although, it was historical when I read it, of course, it still had an impact because it made me feel like, wow, somebody like me can be a hero of a story. And that really changed my entire perspective. Like that was the book that hooked me to reading. So it's a story that still stays with me. I think the Logan family in that book, they're one of the greatest fictional families I've ever read.
Yeah.
And so when I was writing The Hate You Give, I thought about them a lot in crafting Star's family. So I kind of want Star's family to be a contemporary version of them. But yeah, this was the book for me. I mean, I recently got a first edition signed copy as a gift from my editor, and it's like I thought it was the best thing ever, so I will never let anybody touch it.
Oh wow, that's amazing. I love that. I love book collectors, and there's so much also connecting your work and Mildred's because there's this theme of social justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on page 96 of the book, there's this huge formative scene. I marked it, but of course, I have a library copy. I'm gonna need to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Where Mrs. Logan takes her 4 young children to visit an old black man who was set aflame by the Wallace family. They doused him in kerosene, and the words from the book say, "The face had no nose, the head had no hair, The skin was scarred, burned, and the lips were black like charcoal. My question to you is related to your work as well as what Mildred's written here is how do you think about exposing kids and when to these harsh reality truths that we feel and see on TV and in the news every day? You know, this is a young adult.
Yeah.
So is your work.
Yeah.
But it goes into deep stuff. So
Yeah.
how do you tiptoe into that? Is there an age you think about, or do you just go straight for the heart? Tell me how you think about that.
You know, I when you brought that up and you described it just now, I've read that scene so many times that I know it. But when hearing somebody else describe it, you're like, wow, that's pretty gruesome.
Right.
You know, and thinking about it, and I was like, wow, I was a kid reading that. And I remember it had an impact on me then because it made me realize just how dangerous the South was at that time and just how much people were dehumanized. Because for somebody to have done that to him, that means they did not see him as a human
That's
being.
right.
And that really made racism that much more realistic to me. So I think with kids, you know, people are always afraid of, well, it's too much. Do we give them too much? How much do we expose them to? And there's a firm belief amongst a lot of librarians and educators that if a kid will grasp it, they'll grasp it. If not, it'll go straight over their heads.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
okay.
So there's no danger because it'll fly off them like grease
Right.
on a dirty pan if they can't catch it.
Right, if they can't catch it. And I think for me at that age, I caught it, but I had classmates who didn't, you know. And so I think with books, we have to be real with kids. You know, one thing that I've had so many young readers tell me, I've had 8-year-olds who've read The Hate You
That's
Give.
what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've told me, you know, thank you for this book because you kept it real with us. And what that tells me is that kids are tired of us keeping them from so much when the fact is the world, the place we're in right now, we can't hold back.
I was on the airport. Sorry, not the airport. I was on the airplane the other day holding my 2-year-old son on my lap, and I was United Airlines. Okay, not to throw United under the bus here, but before the plane took off, there's a mandatory commercial that's super loud that you can't turn off of all the movies that you can choose from on the airplane with guns and cars blowing up and fire bombs. And I'm like having to just quickly grab my kids and cover their eyes. Like, I'm like, it's 2. I never thought of it like it might just go over his head, but I'm also like,
Right.
they're seeing it already anyway. Why not get it from an informed, thoughtful, careful source who's giving it to them in the right way? Is that,
Exactly. I think that's what it all comes down to. And a lot of it's just parents have to decide what's best for their kid. At the end of the day, they're going to do that anyway.
Right.
But I think for me as an author, I can't worry so much about that, especially as a young adult author. I just want to be authentic and real with my readers, even when it means exposing them to things that they may not be aware of. Because the only way we're going to have great leadership from these kids when they become of age is that they are aware of things beyond themselves. Because the problem we have right now, especially in America, is that we have leaders who have never cared about the world beyond themselves.
Right. And this just kind of gets back to this core issue of kind of trust, I feel like, because on page 128 of this book, there is a blunt and honest history of slavery told from one character to Cassie, the young girl, like I have never heard. I'm a 39-year-old man. I feel like I'm well-read. And here I'm learning about slavery, like from a young adult book that I'm reading to prep for this interview. You know, just a phrase like, you see, Cassie, many years ago, when our people were first brought from Africa as slaves, like the blunt, simple language is the opposite of what you're saying, dehumanizing and removing power. My question is, like, how do you think about trust today in the world? Where do we find honest truth? I've heard you say, I want to talk to my readers the way hip hop artists rap to their listeners. Where do we find honest truth today? And where can we go where we aren't monetized?
That's a good question. You know, I think we find honest truth amongst ourselves. We have to stop looking to media to give it to us. You know, we've seen it now with the news media. They're not going to give us it's a business. Exactly. It's about what clicks, how many clicks they can get, how many views they can get. They're not about giving us the honest truth. We have to talk to each other to get that. You know, as an artist, I feel like art is a great way to get the honest truth, because with artists, we usually put ourselves out there and we put so much of ourselves into our work that it can't help but be truthful. But I think that we just need to start listening and communicating amongst ourselves a bit more. You know, one thing about social media is that, you know, despite the toxic aspects of it, it has made us more aware of others beyond ourselves and connected us to people beyond ourselves. And in some ways, we're getting more truths now. I look at the whole Black Lives Matter movement. We wouldn't know these names if it weren't for people making them into hashtags and talking about them on
Me
social
too.
media. Exactly. The Me Too movement. Yeah, all of
It's a
these things.
hashtag, right?
Yeah, people sharing their stories. So it comes down to us as human beings communicating and telling our truths in order for us to get the actual truth.
Kind of like the old way, sharing
Yeah.
stories. I mean, I agree with that. I so agree with that. At the same time, I find that so not unsettling that you can't trust the papers. I mean, I do agree with you, by the way, that you can't trust the papers. I canceled all my newspaper and magazine subscriptions completely, and I wrote about it like 5 years ago and just focused on books, and it's changed my life for the better. But I feel like when it comes down to sharing in person and on social media, then there's like, what's the ultimate truth? I interviewed Mark Manson for the show, and I haven't released it yet, but he said he only gets his news off Wikipedia.
Oh, wow.
He's like, because it's crowdsourced from people. Maybe it's kind of like that. But it's like, my issue is, what do you trust when you aren't sure who to trust? And can you believe that conspiracy theorist on X, Y, or Z?
Yeah.
Of course not. But then people are talking about it because it's trending,
Right.
So it's like, we get
That's-
caught in these echo chambers too.
Yeah, that's the tricky part. I think we're at a really interesting time right now where so much information is being thrown at us at any given moment that it is hard to figure out what's the truth and what's not. And all of these, like you were talking about with conspiracy theories, I wouldn't, at some point we have to figure out, like, for us, what makes sense even. Like I was recently looking up some stuff on the whole Jussie Smollett thing. I love Jussie, absolutely love
Can you
him.
give a quick background for everyone listening that doesn't know?
Yeah, Jussie Smollett reported that he had been the victim of a hate crime, and now he's being charged with creating a hoax around that whole thing. And so he's an actor from Empire. And now there are people who are saying not only was it a hoax, but there are some conspiracy theorists who are saying he's related to Kamala Harris, and this is a plot of hers cooked up. And at that point,
Who's
you're
Kamala
like,
Harris?
she's running for president in the States.
Okay.
Black woman running for president. And at that point, you're like, no. Even I know, no. And that's when we really have to, I think we have to limit ourselves on how much information we take in order to get the truth.
That's interesting.
I think it comes down to that because there's so many different theories out there and people who are speaking what they think is their truth, and we just have to limit it and figure out which sources for us can be trusted. It does take work on our own part. I know too, we also have to get to the point where we just read things smartly. Don't just go off of a headline and recognize that headlines are created for clicks and for money. So you can read a news article. I can read an article and automatically know, okay, this is fake news. Unfortunately, to use that phrase, but I can tell. And we have to get smart to the point.
You've attuned your BS meter.
Yeah, I have. I see stuff pop up on Facebook and I'm like, nope, that's not true. And then if you can look at the link and recognize, oh, that's a fake link, So we have to get smart ourselves and kind of put filters on so we don't let the BS get through.
And it's so hard too as an artist, making like, so 3 books, for example, I always say 100% no ads, no sponsors, no promotions, no interruptions. I always say that because I'm trying to show to people, I'm only doing this because I love talking to artists and reading. I actually genuinely, I'm trying to uncover the 1,000 most formative books in the world. This show goes till 2031 because I want to do it. So hopefully it's like, maybe we can say, if you've got a selfish motive that you really want to do it and you're doing it for art, I buy into that. But it's an evolving mental science for all of us.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to get bogged down with this one book because I know I'm going to get a slap on the face from your publicist in any minute here. So which book did you want to go to next, Angie?
Let's go with Autobiography of Malcolm X.
Okay, fantastic. So let me give the quick summary here. The Autobiography of Malcolm X by Malcolm X, as told to Alex Haley. Malcolm X lived from 1925 to 1965. This book was published in 1964 by Grove Press. Interestingly, Doubleday, the publisher, canceled their book deal after the assassination of Malcolm X because they were afraid of their lives. Grove Press then picked it up. An independent publisher sold, I think, something like 6 million copies. It was called the biggest mistake ever in publishing history. The book is based on in-depth interviews between Malcolm X and Alex Haley between 1963 and his assassination. I think I must have the copyright date wrong. Maybe it's 65 it came out. The cover is a sepia photo of Malcolm X smiling. You file this in Dewey Decimal under 320.54 for political ideologies. In the searing pages of this classic autobiography, Malcolm X, the Muslim leader, firebrand, and anti-integrationist, tells the extraordinary story of his life and the growth of the Black Muslim movement. His fascinating perspective on the lies and limitations of the American dream and the inherent racism in a society that denies its non-white citizens the opportunity to dream is essential reading for anyone who wants to understand America. So tell us about your relationship with the autobiography of Malcolm X.
You know, it's funny because as we were talking about the whole thing with figuring out the truth and getting to the sources of it, I think that this book was a big step for me in that, because when I was in school, Malcolm X was rarely talked about regarding Black history.
Right.
And then when people did talk about him, he was spoken about in a negative way. You know, same thing with the Black Panthers. They were made out to be the villains of the narrative when so much of the work that they did truly made them heroes. We wouldn't have free breakfast programs in the United States if it wasn't for the work of the Panthers. So reading Malcolm X's autobiography let me know him first from his own narrative as opposed to the one that had been created by the mainstream media.
Right.
And so this book, I remember I read it when I was in college, and I went to a mostly white upper class private Christian school in conservative Mississippi. And I often found myself,
Star.
yeah, I was like Star. I was two different people in two different
Protagonist
worlds.
from The Hate You Give.
Yeah,
for those-
absolutely. Yeah. And
In case that for the 7 people who are listening who have not read The Hate You Give.
yeah,
Keep going.
yeah. So that was
You
my
were at this
experience.
school.
Yeah, yeah. And reading this book really helped me define my Blackness and helped me own it and love it even more. It helped me love the skin that I was in, despite the world that I was in. So it was the moment, I think, for some people, as some people would put it, it was the moment I got woke. You know, it really woke me up. And that book really changed the entire course of the rest of my college years.
Some people say this book is like a history of race relations in the States because he talks so much about the history. Can I ask like the dumbest, most ignorant question of all time?
No, go ahead.
Because I'm a Canadian, I'm a privileged person, I'm from a distance. Can you just give me like a quick, you talked about your Blackness, you talked about the history of kind of Malcolm X, the Panthers. What's the, like, where are we in the U.S. in race relations? You know, like what, you know, slavery happened 16th, 17th century. Clearly there's a tremendous amount of stress and pressure. You can almost see the fissure lines or the smoke lines coming off the country with the shootings and there's so much stuff. Can you give me like a quick pulse check of where do you see race relations in the States today from the time, you know, this book's 60 years ago now? Where's the progress made? Where are we now?
You know, we're in an interesting time right now. It was funny to me that when President Obama was elected, people were like, "Oh, we're in a post-racial society now." No, far from it. The fact is, we're in an interesting time right now because there are people who feel as if you even bring up racism, you're the racist. If I call something out for being racist, I'm the racist. We're in an interesting time right now where people are, to quote Drake, in their feelings about racism, you know? But I think we're also seeing that I think more people are becoming aware of it as a more widespread problem. And the thing is, the trauma of slavery is still in America. And America has yet to recognize the fact that so much of the country was built on racism, was built on slavery. It has not even recognized that fact. And we're in a time right now where people want to make racism normal again, where they want to make racism just a natural part of society.
Like presidential tweets.
Exactly, exactly. He doesn't want to make America great again. He wants to make racism normal again. That's just really what it is.
The conversation around racism has increased over the last few years.
Absolutely,
you know?
absolutely. And America has yet to recognize it or recognize the problems that it has created and still creates. Nobody wants to talk about systemic racism. Nobody wants to talk about how so many of the communities that are troubled and have so many issues, urban communities, is still a result of slavery. Nobody wants to talk about all of that. They'd rather ignore it. So until America actually recognizes that it was built on racism and slavery and decides to address it, racism is still going to be a problem.
So that's the first step.
Absolutely.
The recognition, the conversation around slavery and talking about, do you think that's number one? What is there other things you think of that come to mind when we talk about, like I said, I'm from a privileged position. So it's like, I read your book. I've heard you say, I'm writing for the young Black girls. I'm writing for the young Black kids. I love that. And then as someone reading it who's not that, I'm like, how, you know, what's the best way for me to come into your work and this work that inspires you with a woke mindset and be proactive and move from awareness to action. So what are that point you made is so valid. I didn't realize that, by the way, because here in Canada, we made a lot of historical racist mistakes in Canada. And the government after government usually gets up and says, hey, I'd like to apologize to all the Japanese for keeping y'all in internment camps in World War II. Sorry, that, I know that was 70 years ago. Here's what we're going to do about it. Here's what our action is. And I'm not saying Canada is the super progressive beacon. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to say that. But what I'm trying to say is, growing up here, I've constantly I'm like, what is this thing about these residential schools that we put all the Native Canadians in, and then I learned about it through these apologies. So you're saying that whole process has not even started.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
no.
And I don't even know that. That sounds so dumb. I don't even know that as a Canadian.
No, it hasn't. And I'm sitting here listening to you talk about that, and I'm like, wow, they did that?
Yeah.
That will probably not happen in America anytime soon, They give us holidays for our slain leaders, but don't want to acknowledge the fact that they were the ones that killed those leaders. Like Dr. King's family won a lawsuit against the United States government in which they found them at fault for his death.
Wow.
And people don't talk about that. We just got a holiday, but nobody talks about that.
Wow.
Can
you say more about that? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is that recent?
No, it was about at least 30 years ago.
They won a see, and that's I mean, and I knew I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm gonna feel like such an idiot asking you these questions.
But here's the thing: a lot of people don't know about that. A lot of people don't know about that civil suit. A lot of people don't know that he was being monitored by the U.S. government when he was alive, and he was being watched so closely, and they had intel and all of these things that could have prevented his death, and they didn't do it. And so people don't talk about that, or the fact that we had a thing called Cointelpro run by J. Edgar Hoover. I'm probably getting the name wrong. It's early. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But still, we had Cointelpro, and that whole
what is it?
Cointelpro.
Yeah.
It was an organization with the U.S. government that closely watched what they call Black radicals. So it watched Dr. King. It watched the Black Panthers. And honestly, there were Black Panthers who were killed by the government, and people don't know this. They don't talk about that. So
never mind that in Malcolm X's autobiography, with his break from the Black Muslim community, who eventually murdered him, which is pretty well known. I've been reading a lot about his assassination online coming into this. That also was detected in advance, they say. Well, I mean, I don't want to put words into Wikipedia's mouth, but I'm sensing from all the stuff I'm reading that there's another one that you're just saying, and in this book, by the way, it says, he said, Malcolm X said, if I'm alive when this book comes out, it will be a miracle. On the back of the book, it says, some saw Malcolm X as a courageous advocate for the rights of blacks, a man who indicted white America in the harshest terms for its crimes against Black Americans. Others accused him of preaching racism and violence. To maybe your first point, if you decry racism, you are the racist. But you at your book launch for On the Come Up said, I got this quote from you from the internet, be loud, Black girl, be angry when you want. Find your voice, use it, make some noise, even when it makes them uncomfortable. And I saw that quote from you, and it made me think of this quote from Bree from On the Come Up, which, by the way, kept me up till 4 a.m. I loved it. She says, unarmed and dangerous, but America, you made us. Only time we famous is when we die and you blame us.
Absolutely.
So I'm trying to draw a thread here between this book, you, and this. You feel this connection, right? Am I saying that right? Okay.
Yes.
Religion. Can I talk to you about religion? It's a very religious book. At the time of writing it, Malcolm X was with the Nation of Islam. Then he broke with them, but so they're a big part of this book. And on Twitter, your bio says, I love Jesus, but I cuss. and of course, Jesus is at the top of your acknowledgments in the book. And on chapter 15 of 3 books, this show, Mitch Albom, who wrote Tuesdays with Maury, says that, and he often writes with a religious bent, 5 people you're going to meet in heaven and so on. He said, religion's becoming closeted, and National Geographic says the fastest growing religion in the world is actually no religion. I'm like, what space or place? And I know some of your characters on the come up are sort of overtly or strongly religious. Tell me, where do you think religion sits right now in society? Where is it moving to? What role can it be? How can it help the people reading your books, and where do you kind of see it?
Well, that's always an interesting topic for me. People read my books and they're surprised to know that I am a Christian, and that bothers me because it bothers me too, because it's like, one, you don't think Christians can be radical about stuff. And the fact is, Jesus was a radical. And I believe if he was walking the earth right now, if he was walking amongst us, he'd be saying Black Lives Matter. He'd be protesting walls. He'd be doing all of these things in the opposite of what evangelicals are saying and doing. So I think a lot of us these days, I think a lot of people are ashamed to have any beliefs, because when you do have beliefs, the people who are loudest are wrong.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, like with Christians, like some of the worst people right now are openly Christian. Like Mike Pence, he calls himself a Christian, and the stuff that he says and does not align with who he claims he loves. So
It's like Hassan Minaj's stand up about being a Muslim. He's saying, when after 9/11, like people broke all the glass on our van in our driveway. So you're saying if you identify with religion, you also identify with the worst religious people.
Exactly.
Is that what you're kind of saying? Like
yeah. And I don't want to be aligned with them. So my goal is always personally is to live it, even if I'm not always talking about it. I want to be the example for it and to show what my faith really looks like, as opposed to these people who say that they have the same faith and they're hateful and spewing hateful rhetoric, So I think right now, society as a whole, for so often, religion has divided us in so many ways. I look at specifically, like I was just saying with Christianity, I look at how many young people have killed themselves because they identify as LGBTQIA, and it goes back to rhetoric that was spewed by Christians. How many kids have been put out on the streets because their parents claim they love Jesus, but not enough to love their kid as they are. So I think religion has hurt a lot of people. Religion has caused a lot of hurt. And that's the exact opposite. Specifically as a Christian, that's the exact opposite of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be about love. And it has caused so much hurt that people are going away from it. And that's a sad state that we're in.
What's the way to get into it? What's the way for those listening who want to get into that version of it you're talking about? What's the way in? How do we avoid the headlines and walk in the front door?
I'm still trying to figure it out myself. I'm still trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah.
It's a personal relationship for me. It's a personal thing. And I can no longer let others dictate to me what that looks like. I know the love that I felt and the love that I try to show others. And that's how I try to walk the walk.
Yeah.
I may not always talk the talk, but I at least want to walk the walk.
And you do that beautifully. Do not say you don't. You do that so well. Angie, your third and final book is The Rose That Grew from Concrete. And by the way, in the background, Maeve is like waving at me. So now, Maeve, should we go super fast and jump in the car, or should I jump in the car with you guys?
Give her some time to get ready upstairs.
Okay.
I just have to grab a hat and a jacket.
You have a third and final book to
Yes, yeah, but I'll go real fast.
Because I just want to give her some time upstairs.
We absolutely will. I'll go really fast on this one. The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur, who lived from 1971 to 1996, second assassinated book by you, age 25. This book was published in 1999 by MTV Books, 3 years after his death. The cover is a super zoomed in artsy photo of Tupac. Dewey Decimal, guys, this is 811.54 under poetry. Tupac's most intimate and honest thoughts were uncovered only after his death with the instant classic, The Rose That Grew from Concrete. This collection of deeply personal poetry is a mirror into the legendary artist's enigmatic world and its many contradictions. Written in his own hand from the time he was 19 years old, these 72 poems embrace his spirit, energy, and message of hope. Tell us about your relationship with The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur.
We were talking about it. It kind of goes to the theme we've been talking about today, finding out the truth for yourself. Pac is one of those people who, there are so many people who have an idea of who they think he was, and there are so few people who actually talk about who he genuinely was. The media portrayed him as a troublemaker, as a gangster, blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the day, he was a young 25-year-old when he died, who was still trying to figure things out. Yeah, he made mistakes. He did things he shouldn't have done. But at the end of the day, who doesn't? So reading The Rose That Grew from Concrete gave me a bit more of a view of him, the person, Tupac the person, and not the rapper. And reading his work and his words and seeing it in his handwriting and knowing what he would go on to become, it showed me anything is possible. You had this 19-year-old kid, 16, 17-year-old kid, who was at one point homeless, who was at one point making pizzas for a living because that was the only way he'd get a good meal. He was doing all of these different things, and he grew up to become one of the greatest rappers of all time.
75 million albums.
Exactly. So I think,
And it's written in like, like the word two is always written as the number two. The word you is always written like the letter U. It's
yeah,
like, he was pre-texting. He
yeah,
was like, he beat texting. Like he,
he really
I
was.
mean, maybe he caused this writing, but obviously the title of your first book is the Tupac lyric, right?
Mhm.
Right. The hate you give, a short for thug life. The hate you give little infants fucks everybody, meaning that the society gives the hate as the hate that society gives as youth bites them in the ass when we get wild, right? I think that's a quote from the book. There's this poem in here from Mrs. Hawkins, in memory of Yusef Hawkins, and I read about this poem, and as I was reading it, I was like, oh man, this is about a shooting. Like this is about a black kid. So I looked it up on Wikipedia. It was a black child in Brooklyn who was swarmed by a gang of young white kids, beaten with baseball bats and shot. They were tried, put in prison. But I was thinking, this is 1989. Now we're in 2019. 20 years. Is this conversation, like, are we doomed to have this conversation forever? Like, is progress being made? What role could your work help? You've illustrated it with a huge spotlight, but where are we? Where do you see this going?
It's devastating to know that what Tupac wrote back then is still relevant now. And it's devastating to think that what I wrote with The Hate You Give may be relevant 20, 30 years from now. I hope not. My biggest hope is that book is no longer relevant 20, 30 years from now. But the only way we're going to stop repeating history is to actually discuss history. Nobody talks about Yusef. A lot of people don't know his name.
Yeah,
and then
I didn't know.
right,
I had to look it up.
Yeah, I had to at one point. And the thing is, we don't talk about that stuff, so we're bound to repeat that stuff. And we have to keep calling that stuff out. So for me, like I said, as an author, I feel like what I do when I write for young people, I'm making investments in the future. And I hope that by making them aware of what's happening now, when they become politicians with Twitter accounts, they have more knowledge of it and they have more empathy so that we can work at eradicating these things. So I take what I do very seriously in that sense. So, I hope that at some point these things can become non-existent. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And this is my very, very, very last question as you are about to go up to a throng of hundreds of thousands of people at the Art Gallery of Ontario. This is called The Rose Who Grew from Concrete. And you wrote in your acknowledgments of your book, to all the roses growing in concrete. What does a rose in concrete mean to you? And what is your final message, Angie, to those listening who are those roses you're talking to today?
That analogy, it's always been one of my favorites. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that Tupac ever came up with. He was like, I remember him talking about it. If you saw a rose growing in the crack in the concrete, how many people would be more in awe of the fact that a rose was growing in concrete, and how many people would focus on the damaged petals? And I think of the kids that I write about, the kids that I write for as roses in concrete. So many of these young people, they're in difficult circumstances, but there's so much beauty within them. And instead of us focusing on that, we focus on their damaged petals instead of the fact that their roses growing in cracks in the concrete. And I hope that we can get to the point where we celebrate young people for being their authentic, beautiful selves and celebrate the beauty and the genius within them. And that's what I try to do as a writer. So that's what I see a rose as concrete and being. I see there's so many of them around us every single day, and we just got to start celebrating that beauty within them.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Neil. It is just me again. Wow? Can we say wow with like a bold, italic, and underline on that one? Angie Thomas was brave. She was vulnerable. She was honest. She was courageous. She says she wants to write the way hip-hop artists rap. And you can see where it comes from, can't you? Like, she is just so full of energy and life. And like I said, this was at the end of her book tour. From here, the reason Maeve was saying, like, let's go, and she's got to go get her coat and her hat, was because they were just about to head off to the Art Gallery of Ontario, the largest art gallery in all of Toronto, where thousands of people were awaiting her. This event sold out in seconds when it was announced. Throngs of people eager to hear her read from On the Come Up, get her books, get her sign her books. The next day she had another event in Toronto. So she was just like full. And despite that, didn't she just rock the mic? I think she did. She gave us Number 927, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. Number 926, The Autobiography of Malcolm X by Malcolm X. And number 925, The Rose That Grew from Concrete by Tupac Shakur. Interesting, sad, obviously, that two of those three people died by assassination. Mildred D. Taylor is still alive and has written many more books since Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. But there is so many themes that pop out from these books, and I hope you feel like in the limited half an hour I had, you could hear the countdown in the background, I hopefully helped poke open some of them. 3 quotes that stood out for me were this. Remember I said at the beginning, see if you can guess them. Well, here's the 3 I got. See if you got all 3, or 1, or 2. They give us holidays for our slain leaders, but don't want to acknowledge they slayed them. It bothers me when people are surprised I'm Christian. You don't think Jesus was a radical? If Jesus was alive today, he'd be saying Black Lives Matter and protesting walls. And finally, we have to find honest truth amongst ourselves and stop looking to the media to give it to us. Amen, Angie, sing it. I totally agree with this. The news is a business. It gets paid for attention in the form of advertisements, so they are incentivized monetarily to keep their jobs and to give themselves promotions when there are more controversial and provocative headlines. Good news doesn't sell. That's why shows like this, shows like Mr. Rogers, shows like Sesame Street, shows that are doing great work for the world from an artistic perspective, we go 100% ad-free, sponsor-free, commercial-free, and interruption-free. There's no ads on 3 bucks. There never is, never has been, never will be. And believe me, I am asked about this very often. It's probably the biggest question I get in my inbox. Can we do an ad? Can we promote? No is the answer. I want this show to be a piece of art. We are going all the way up to September 1st, 2031, publishing a new chapter on the exact minute of every single full moon and new moon to get us there. So until next time, big thank you to Maeve. Big thank you to Angie. This has been another chapter 26 of 3 books. Thank you so much for listening. And now, are you still here? Are you still with me? If so, I'd like to welcome you back to the end of the podcast club. This is the club that you talk directly to me. I talk directly to you. It's one of 2 clubs we have for 3 books listeners. The other club is the secret club, the analog club, the Through the Mail Club, and you can only find out details for that by calling our phone number. Yes, we have a phone number. Yes, you can call it from anywhere in the world because we paid for the international plan. It is 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Again, it is 1-833-READALOT. Sometimes people say, hey, but you don't need 8 numbers. I'm like, yeah, but read a low makes no sense. So just when you get to read a low, the phone might start ringing, but I just say read a lot so that you can kind of keep pressing buttons and remembering it. And with that, shall we, people? Let's go to the phones.
Hi, this is Sarah from Oregon, and I'm so happy to have recently found the 3 Books podcast. Thank you, Neil, for creating this incredible gift and for bringing it to all of us. In a short time, I've listened to 8 chapters, and every single one has been a grand slam. Each time I come away with that unmistakable, uplifting feeling of having been part of a rare, insightful conversation that happens unexpectedly in life, but that Neil naturally brings about in each chapter with his presence, preparation, warmth, and curiosity. My only suggestion would be to add new episodes for each new and full moon of all of the 16 to 24 moons of Jupiter as well. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much to Sarah from Oregon. What a super nice voicemail. That was really kind. I don't always play the complimentary ones. I love them, obviously. I don't always play them, though, because I feel all shucks about it, right? So when someone's got a provocative question, sometimes I'm more likely to pick that one. But Sarah, I had to play yours. Moons of Jupiter. That's what caught me. I think you said 16 moons of Jupiter. Guess what? I spent half an hour reading about the moons of Jupiter on Wikipedia. Turns out there are 79 moons of Jupiter. 4 are known as Galilean moons, the gigantic ones, the big ones. The biggest one of all is even bigger than Mercury, smaller than Earth though. And 75 Jovian moons, Jovian. I'm probably saying that wrong. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure. Thank you so much to Sarah. And now it's time for the letter of the chapter. And for this letter, we're going to get a note back from Jennifer. For those that listened to chapter 24 of 3 Books with Jonathan Fields, you may remember we played a voicemail from Jennifer, the doctor who worked in a rural setting in Eastern Ontario. She said she always walked her dogs, looked at the moon to know when the next chapter of our show is going to drop. And she said she's got a problem as a doctor because she knows books are medicine. We always say that on the show, books are medicine. One of our values, of course, is librarians are doctors for the mind. If you want all our values, just go to 3books.co/values. We've got all our values up there. And she's like, I got a problem because, like, according to infectious disease rules, we can't keep, like, libraries in doctor's offices. And I was like, what the hell? Get contraband, like, go contraband then. Like, you know, have people, like, look into a special box. Anyway, Jennifer wrote me a letter. She says, Dear Neil, I'm an emotional mess listening to your latest podcast. I am the Jennifer. Thank you for your very kind words regarding the medical profession. Right now, the climate in healthcare has been so difficult with many poor government decisions, but we do what we do because patient care is so rewarding. Your compliments had me smiling through my tears as I have just read When Breath Becomes Air, one of Jonathan's books, and the thought of that book brings tears to my eyes. I was also emotionally fragile listening today, in a good way, because in grade 10, my class play was The Old Man and the Sea that we put on with my favorite English teacher, Mrs. Hamlin, who just died a few months ago. I'm thinking of having my contraband bookshelf under the sink in my clinic, or maybe in the trunk of my car. Thank you for everything you do. Your passion is infectious. Your kindness is humbling. I look forward to many more years of your podcast, 3 Books, and all the books that I will discover. Jennifer. Oh my gosh, now I have tears in my eyes. That is so beautiful. And that's what this show is all about, making these incredible spiderweb-like heart connections across the world. I know with a name as big as Angie Thomas, I'm probably talking to new fans right now, new listeners. 3 Books was voted one of the best podcasts of the year, Apple's best of 2018. But the only way it's ever going to grow is by people like Jennifer and people like John in San Diego and people like Roy in South Africa, like getting as passionate as they are and sending us letters. Keep sending your letters. We read them in the form of reviews on iTunes, reviews on YouTube videos, letters to my email, blah, blah, blah. Pigeons, cutouts, postcards. Any way you want to send a letter, you can. Okay. And now it's time for the word of the podcast, word of the chapter. For chapter 26, I don't want to reveal the word. Let's let Angie reveal it to us.
People don't talk about that, or the fact that we had a thing called Cointelpro, run by J. Edgar Hoover. I'm probably getting the name wrong. It's early. I'm sorry,
okay.
But still, we had Cointelpro, and that whole
what is it?
Cointelpro.
Yeah.
It was an organization with the U.S. government that closely watched what they call Black radicals.
Yes, indeed, it is Cointelpro. Did you notice me in the podcast? I'm like, Cointelpro. Like, and even if this podcast kept going, I was like, what? I was like, kind of pretend. I couldn't keep stopping her and saying, what is that? What is that? But my brain was itching to know more about what she was saying. Cointelpro. 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 It reminds me of that word that, remember back in chapter 5 with Gretchen Rubin, her word was Cohen. And I was like, I had to email Gretchen. I don't think I admitted this in that chapter. I was like, Gretchen, I've been looking for the word Cohen online. I can't find it. Is it Cohen? Is it Coaen? Like, how do you spell it? And she's like, oh no, it's a Zen Cohen. Well, similarly, Cointelpro, I had to look for it for a while. Turns out it's a portmanteau. What? What did I just say? It is a portmanteau. Now, have you ever heard that word portmanteau before? Okay, here's how you say that word, first of all.
Portmanteau.
Portmanteau, which is a large trunk or suitcase, or a word blending the sounds and combining the meanings of 2 other words. Huh. I love this word, portmanteau. I don't think I really even knew it. You know what a good example is? Brunch, combination of breakfast and lunch. Or motel, a combination of motor and hotel. I didn't know that. And podcast. Get this one, people. Podcast. What I'm talking into and what you're listening into right now is a portmanteau, because it's a portmanteau of iPod and broadcast. An iPod broadcast. I guess that sounds better than phonecast, which is probably what they'd call it if they invented it now on the iPhone. Podcast. Interesting, by the way, when I say podcast, a lot of people now don't realize that came from the word iPod. I guess I kind of did subconsciously because I remember them like back in the day, but I didn't know it was a portmanteau. However, Cointelpro, let's get back on topic, people. You guys gotta slap me. I can hear you. Neil, come on, get with it. Cointelpro is a nastier and darker portmanteau. CO is from counter, Intel is from intelligence, and pro is from program. Counterintelligence program. It operated from 1956 to 1971 in the United States through the FBI. It was a series of covert and at times illegal projects aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting domestic political organizations. FBI public records now show that COINTELPRO resources targeted groups and individuals that the FBI simply deemed subversive, like the Communist Party of the USA, anti-Vietnam War organizers, activists of the civil rights movement, right? Martin Luther King, Black Power movement, which is what we talked about today, and the Black Panther Party with Malcolm X, feminist organizations, the American Indian movement. Oh my gosh, people, independence movements such as Puerto Rican independence groups, and a variety of other organizations. Like, seriously, I went into an hour-long Wikipedia rabbit hole. This stuff is just from above the fold. This is just the top of the Wikipedia entry. That's a gigantic entry. The FBI has used covert operations against domestic political groups since its inception. However, the covert operations under the official COINTELPRO label took place between 1956 and 1971. But get this, COINTELPRO tactics are still used to this day and have been alleged to include discrediting targets through psychological warfare, smearing individuals and groups using forged documents, and illegal violence up to and including assassination, including with many of the Black Panthers. Black Panthers affected by COINTELPRO include Fred Hampton, Mummy Abu-Jamal, Marshall Conway, the list goes on and on and on. This is depressing reading when you read this. There is a lot here. And the final thing above the fold, when I say above the fold, I mean the top of Wikipedia before you even get to like the table of contents for the entry. It says, the last thing says, internal documents dated as late as 2017 showed the FBI is continuing to engage in similar programs by surveilling groups such as the Black Lives Matter movement. Angie, if you're listening now, you're on point. You nailed it. Like, COINTELPRO is a word I'd never heard before, and now here I am traipsing through this endless rabbit hole of government surveillance. I mean, sure, I've watched TV shows, I've watched Homeland, I get that, but when you read about it on Wikipedia with thousands of sources below, and you start uncovering, like, they were sending Martin Luther King's wife, images of Martin Luther King with women that were doctored, saying that he's having an affair on you and pretending to be like lovers of his. Like, it gets deep and it gets nasty and it gets brutish fast. And today's conversation was illuminating to me personally on a number of levels. I think my ignorance was beaming out of the conversation. I'm sure it was. But that's partly what 3 books is all about. Ignorance may be bliss, but it also gets beautifully scratched when we fill it with education. We ask dumb questions on this show. We always will. We always have. And we try to go on a journey together to uncover and discuss life's most important themes in a safe space. Thank you for the privilege and honor of being your host. And until next time, remember that you are what you eat and you are what you read. Keep turning that page, and I'll talk to you soon.